Mr. Chairman, Ms. Vaughn, I'd like to return to your testimony. You touched on a subject that I think is a very important aspect of what we're here to discuss today, and that is human trafficking and how these policies are affecting women and girls and children who are being trafficked. Specifically, you used the phrase in your opening that these kids go into the HHS assembly line with few questions being asked, and I'd like to focus a bit there. It is correct, is it not, that when that happens, we've seen numerous incidents of children who are actually put into placements in homes that prove to be unsafe?
Absolutely, yes. There are a number of instances where, for example, girls have been placed with older men in what is clearly an exploitative situation. There are kids who have been turned over to labor traffickers. There are kids who get turned over to gang members. There are kids who get placed into domestic servitude and other forms of abuse. It's really quite horrific.
Well, and I know we have also seen cases where, and this happened even in my own state, if the children themselves aren't screened, that can pose a danger or an inappropriate circumstance for a host family. Is that also correct?
Yes. There are problems at some of the shelters sometimes, incidents of predatory behavior on the other kids who are housed there until they're released. There was the case in Jacksonville where the alleged minor who turned out to be 24 years old, because the Border Patrol is not able to really screen people, murdered his sponsor.
And in your opinion, after children are placed in these sponsor homes, is there an adequate level of follow-up and supervision that is occurring by HHS?
Absolutely not. There's almost no supervision or follow-up that goes on. These standards that they have for not only placements, but also post-placement services are way inferior to the procedures that every state in the union uses for foster care placements, for example. And I mean, it's been said that it is harder to adopt a cat than it is to sponsor an unaccompanied minor, because there are rarely background checks done, almost never home studies, no financial assessments. The Biden administration has stopped doing background checks on other people in the households to make sure that the placements are safe. This is something that simply would not be tolerated in our foster care system.
And you also mentioned that roughly a quarter of the trafficking victims were children. Would you tell us a little bit more about that and the patterns that you see that are affecting young people and children that are coming to this country?
Well, what happens is the smugglers often either convince the parents of these kids that they're going to have a better life in the United States, so pay us a down payment on the smuggling fee now, and the child will make enough money or be able to go to school, or some other tale to get the parents to release the kid, who, when they get to the United States, are often released to a sponsor who turns out to be a trafficker, or are put in directly into trafficking situations. Sometimes it's forced labor trafficking, sometimes it's commercial sex, sometimes it's domestic servitude, but the child is isolated from their family members in the complete control of the people who have custody of them. There's no monitoring of the situation by the federal government that put them in this situation. There is very little opportunity for seeing what's going on in some of these workplaces to rescue the kids. It's a lot of, frankly, hear no evil, see no evil, there must not be any, really deliberately kind of looking the other way at what is happening.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Agent Maltz, I want to return to you. You used a phrase in your written testimony that I think is important, and I want to be sure that we today hear the distinction that you make as someone who spent so many years with DEA. The distinction is between drug traffickers, which is something that we've seen obviously for many decades coming across our southern border, but you use the phrase narco-terrorist. Would you please explain to us the distinction between a drug trafficker and a narco-terrorist?
Well, a drug trafficker is in the business to make money only. And the cartels, when I first started to work, we were known them as drug traffickers, right? But they've evolved from drug traffickers to transnational criminals, but now they're narco-terrorists. Just look at the death and destruction and what they're doing in that country. I mean, when I was the head of the Special Operations Division, I kept on my phone the greatest hits of the violence in Mexico with the decapitations, the chopping off limbs, throwing people in acid. They used to have a guy called the stew maker. He would drop 300 people in acid pits so they were never found. That's why in Mexico today, there's so many disappearances. They don't want to put that out because it's going to deter any, tourism in Mexico. But these cartels, I mean, Jason can tell you, he reports on it every week, every 2 weeks. They got tanks, they got rockets, they got drones that drop explosives. That's another thing that makes me concerned as a citizen, because as our brave men and women are on the border, what happens if one day they drop the explosives on our own people, right? So these guys have evolved to the point where, I mean, they're a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. They have plenty of money. They have no rules. They have no bureaucracy. So I'm very concerned about their evolution and the lack of the way we deal with them.
Thank you, Agent Maltz. I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman.